Derry, the first interlude. How many human eyes had snatched grimlessly of their secret anatomius down the passage of years? Clive Barkey, Books of Blood. The segment below and all other interlude segments are drawn from Derry in Unauthorized Town History by Michael Hanlon. This is an unpublished set of notes and complicated fragments and manuscripts, which had almost like Derry entrance found in the Derry Public Library vault. The title given is the one written on the cover of the Luzlef blinder, in which these notes were kept primarily to their appearance here. The author, however, refers to the work several times within his own notes as Derry, a look through hell's back door. One supposed the thoughts of popular publication had done more than cross Mr. Hanlon's mind. January 2nd, 1985. Can an entire city be haunted? Haunted as some houses are supposed to be haunted? Not a single building in that city, or the corner of a single street or a single basketball court. In a single pocket park, the netless basket jutted out as sunset, like some acure and bloody instrument of torture. Not just one arena, but everything. The whole works. Can that be? Listen. Haunted often, visit by ghosts or spirits. Funk and wagnalls. Haunted. And presently recurrent to the mind, difficult to forget. Dido, funk, and friend. To haunt, to appear, to recur often, especially as a ghost. But and listen, a place often visit, resorts, den, hangout, intellect are, of course, mine. And one more, this one like the last, is a definition of haunt as a noun, and it's one that really scares me. A feeding place for animals, like the animals that beat up Adrian Mellon and then threw up over the bridge. Like the animal that was wading underneath the bridge. A feeding place for animals. What feeding in Derry? What feeding on Derry? You know, it's sort of interesting. I didn't know it was possible for a man to become as frightening as I have become since the Adrian Mellon business, and still live, let alone function. It's as if I've fallen into a story, and everyone knows you're not supposed to feel this afraid until the end of the story. When the haunter of the dark finally comes out of the woodwork to feed on you, of course, on you. But if this is a story, it's not one of those classic screamers by Lovecraft or Bradbury or Poe. I know you see not everything, but a lot. I didn't just start when I opened the Derry News. One day, just last September, read the transcript of the Unwin's Boys, premeditatively hearing and realizing that the clown who killed George Debrog might well be back again. I actually started around 1980. I think that is when some part of me, which had been asleep, woke up, knowing that its time might be coming round again. What part? The watchman part, I suppose. Or maybe it was the voice of the turtle. Yes, I rather think was that. I know it's what Bill Debrog would believe. I discovered news of old horrors in old books, read intelligence of old accurates in old periodicals, always in the back of my mind, every day a bit louder. I heard the seashells, drone of some growing, cyclossical force. I seemed to smell the bitter ozone, amaranth of lightens to come. I began making notes for a book I will almost certainly not live to write, and at the same time I went on with my life. On one level of my mind, I was and am living with the most grotesque cat-purring horrors. On another, I have continued to live the meditative life of a small city librarian. I shelve books. I make out library cards for new patrons. I turn off the miracle readers. Careless users sometimes leave on. I joke with Carol Danner about how much I would like to go to bed with her, and she jokes back about how much she liked to go to bed with me, and both of us know that she's really joking, and I'm really not. Just as both of us know that she won't stay in a little place like Derry for long, and I will be here until I die, taping tore pages in Business Week, sitting down at monthly equations, meetings with my pipe in one hand and a stack of librarian journals in the other, and walking in the middle of the night with my fists jammed against my mouth to keep in the screams. The Gothic combinations are all wrong. My hair has not turned white. I do not sleepwalk. I have not begun to make crepiting comments or to carry a parachute around in my sport coat pocket. I think I laugh a little more, that's all. And sometimes it must seem a little shrill and strange because sometimes people look at me oddly when I laugh. Part of me, the part Bill would call the voice of the turtle, says I should call them all tonight. But am I even completely sure? Do I want to be completely sure? No, of course not. But God, what happened to Adrian Mellon is so much like what happened to Stutterin' Bill's brother, George, in the fall of 1957. If it has started again, it will call them. I'll have to. But not yet. It's too early anyway. Last time it began slowly and didn't really get going until the summer of 1958. So I wait and fill up the waiting with words in his notebook and long moments of looking into the mirror to see the stranger the boy became. The boy's face was bookish and timid. The man's face in the face is for the face of the bank teller in a Western movie. The fellow who ever has any lines, the one who just gets to his hands up and looks scared when the robbers come in. And if the script calls for anyone to get shot by the bad guys, he's the one. Same old Mike, a little starey in the eyes, maybe a little punchy from broken sleep, but not so's you'd notice without a good close look, like kissing distance, close, and I haven't been that close to anyone in a very long time. If you took a casual glance at me, you might think he's been reading too many books. But that's all. I doubt you guess how hard the man with the mild blank teller's faces how now struggling just to hold on to its own mind. If I had to make those calls, it may kill some of them. That's one of the things I've had to face on the long nights when sleep won't come. Nights when I lie there in bed, wearing my comforter's blue pajamas, my spectacles neatly folded up, and lying on the nightable next to the glass of water I always put there in case I wake up thirsty in the night. I lie there in the dark, and I take small sips of the water, and I wonder how much or how little they remember. I am somehow convinced that they don't remember any of it, because they don't need to remember. I'm the only one that hears the voice of the turtle, the only one who remembers, because I'm the only one who stayed in Derry, and because they are scattered to the four winds. They have no way of knowing the identical patterns their lives have taken to bring them back, to show that pattern. Yes, it might kill some of them. It might kill all of them. So I go over it and over it in my mind. I go over them, trying to recreate them as they were and as they might now be, trying to decide which of them is the most veritable Richie Trashmouth Torzor. I think sometimes he was the one Chris Huggins and Bowers seemed to catch up with the most often, in spite of the fact that Ben was so fat. Bowers was the one Richie was the most scared of, the one we were all the most scared of, but the others used to really put the fear of God into him, too. If I call him out there in California, would he see it as some horrible return of the big bullies? 2 from the grave and 1 from the madhouse in Jupiter Hills, where he raves to his day. Sometimes I think Eddie was the weakest, Eddie with the dominant tank of the mother, and his terrible case of asthma. Beverly, she always tried to talk so tough, but she was as scared as the rest of us. Stutterin' Bill, faced with a horror that won't go away when he puts the cover on his typewriter. Stan Eris, there's a gallinity blade hanging over their lives, razor sharp, but the more I think about it, the more I think they don't know what the blade is there. I'm the one with my hand on the lever. I can pull it just by opening my telephone notebook and calling them one after the other. Maybe I won't have to do it. I hold on to the wan and hope that I've mistaken the rabbity cries of my own timid mind for the deeper, truer voice of the turtle. After all, what do I have? Million in July. A child found dead on Neobolt Street last October. Another found, maybe it was a tramp, as the papers say, or a crazy who since left Derry or killed himself out of remorse and self-disgust, as some of the books say the real Jack the Ripper may have gone, maybe, but the Aldering girl was found directly across the street from that damned old house on Neobolt Street, and she was killed on the same day was George Debrock was 27 years before. And then the Johnson boys found in Memorial Park with one of his legs missing below the knee. Memorial Park is, of course, the home of the Derry standpipe. And the boy was found almost at its foot. The standpipe is within a shout of the barns. The standpipe is also where Stan Uris saw those boys. Those dead boys. Still, it could all be nothing but smoke and mirage. Could be or condensance, or perhaps something between the two, a kind of malefic echoes. Could that be? I sense that it could be. Here in Derry, anything could be. I think what was here before is still here. The thing that was here in 1957 and 1958. The thing that was here in 1929 and in 1930, when the black spot was burned down by the main legends of white desiccacy, the thing that was here in 1904 and 1905 and earlier 1906, and until the Kitchener Ironworks exploded, the thing that was here in 1876 and 1877, the thing that has shown up every 27 years or so. Sometimes it comes a little sooner, sometimes a little later, but it always comes. As one goes back, the wrong notes are harder and harder to find because the records grow poorer and the mouthholes in the narrative history of the arena grow bigger, but knowing where to look and when to look goes a long way towards solving the problem. It always comes back, you see. It. So yes, I think I'll have to make those calls. I think it was meant to be us. Somehow, for some reason, we're the ones who have been elected to stop it forever. Blind fate, blind luck. Or is it that damn turtle again? Does it perhaps command as well as speak? I don't know, and I doubt if it matters. All those years ago, Bill said the turtle can't help us. And if it was true, then it must be true now. I think of us standing in the water, hands collapsed, making that promise to come back if it ever started again. Standing there almost like Druids in a ring, our hands bleeding their own promise, palm to palm, a ritual that is perhaps as old as mankind itself, as unknowing, tap-driven into the tree of all power, the one that grows on the borderline between the land of all we know and that of all we suspected, because the similarities. But I'm doing on my own Bill Debrock here, stuttering over the same ground again and again, recounting a few facts and a lot unpleasant and rather Genshinist suspicions, growing more and more obsidian with every paragraph. No good, useless, dangerous, even, but it is so very hard to wait on events. This notebook is supposed to be an effort to get beyond that obsession by widening the focus of my attention. After all, there is more to this story than 6 boys and 1 girl. None of them happened, none of them accepted by their peers. who stumbled into a nightmare. During one hot summer, when Eisenhower was still president, it is an attempt to pull the camera back a little, if you will, to see the whole city, a place where nearly 35,000 people work and get and sleep and completed a shop and drive around and walk and go to the school and go to jail and sometimes disappear into the dark to know what a place is. I really do believe one has to know what it was. And if I had to name a day when all of this really started again for me, it would be the day in the early spring of 1980 when I went to see Albert Carson, who died last summer at 91. He was full of years as well as honor. He had Liberin here from 1940 to 1960, an incredible span, but he was an incredible man, and I felt that if anyone would know which history of this arena was the best one to start with, Albert Carson. I asked him my question as we sat on his porch, and he gave me my answer, squeaking in a croak. He was already fighting the throat cancer, which would eventually kill him. Not one of them is worth a shit, as you damn well know. Then where should I start? Start what, for Christ's sake? Researching the history for the arena, for Derry Township. Oh, well, start with the freaking in Mitrov. They're supposed to be the best. And after I read them, then read Barkener and Barson. Butterin was a damn sloppy researcher and officially with a thermal boner. If half of what I heard when I was a kid was true, but when it came to Derry, his heart was in the right place. He got most of his facts wrong, but he got them wrong with feeling. Hanlon. I laughed a little and Carson grinned with his littering lips, an expression of good humor that was actually a little frightened. In that instance, he looked like a virtual happy garden, a freshly killed animal, waiting for it to reach exactly the right stage of tasty dominant position before beginning to dine. When you finish with Barrington, read Ives, make notes on all the people he talked to. Sandy Ives is still at the University of Maine, Forklehurst. After you read him, go see him, buy him a drink. I take him to the Ortica, because dinner at the Ortica seems to never end. Pump him, fill up a notebook with names and addresses, talk to the old timers he's talked to, those that are still left. They are a few of us. Ah ha ha ha! And get some more names from them. By then, you'll have all the place to stand you'll need. If you're half as bright as I think you are. If you chase down enough people, you'll find out a few things that aren't in the histories, and you may find they disturbs your sleep. Derry, what about it? Derry's not right. Is it? Right, he asked, in that whispering croak. What's right? What does that word mean? Is right pretty pictured of a Ken Strawback at sunset, composition by so-and-so, f-stop, such and such? If so, then Derry is right, because there are pretty pictures of it by the score. Is right a damn covenant of dry box old virgins to save the Gonvers mansion, or to put a conversation flag in front of the standpipe? If that's right, then Derry's right as rain, because we've got more than our share of old kitty cats minding everybody's business. Is right that ugly plastic statue of Paul Bunyan in front of the city center? Oh, if I had a truckle of napkin and old Zippo lighter, I'd take care of that fucking thing, I assure you. But if one's asynagogue is broad enough to include plastic statues, then Derry is right. The question is, what does right mean to you, Hanlon? More to the point, what does right not mean? I could only shake my head. He either knew or he didn't. He would either tell or he wouldn't. Do you mean the unpleasant stories you may hear, or the ones you already know? There are always unpleasant stories. A town's history is like a rambling old mansion filled with rooms and chubby holes and laundry chutes and gardens and all sorts of accidents, little hiding places, not to mention an occasional secret passage or two. If you go exploring Mansion Derry, you'll find all sorts of things. Yes, you may be sorry later, but you'll find them. And once a thing is found, it can't be unfound, can it? Some of the rooms are locked, but there are keys. There are keys. His eyes glinted at me with an old man's sephirus. You may come to think you stumbled on the worst of Derry's secrets, but there is always one more, and one more, and one more. Do you? I think I shall have to ask you to excuse me just now. My throat is very bad today. It's time for my medicine and my nap. In other words, here is a knife and a fork, my friend. Go see you can cut with them. I started with Fricky history and the Murchad history. I followed Carson's advice and threw them in a waste basket, but I read them first. Then they were as bad as he had suggested. I read the Bolton history, copied out the footnotes, and chased them down. That was more satisfying, but footnotes are particular things, like footpaths, twisting, although a wild and accurate country. They split, then they split again. At any point, you may take a wrong turn, which leads you either to a burned or choked dead end or into swampy quick mud. If you find a footnote, a library science prof once told a class of which I was part, step on its head and kill it before it can breed. They do breed, and sometimes the breeding is a good thing, but I think that more often it is not. Those in Burton's Sniffly written A History of Old Derry, or no, University of Maine Press, 1950, wandered through 100 years, wharf of forgotten books and dusty masters, dermishes, and fields of history and folklore, through original and defunct magazines, and a-month brain-nubbing stacks of town reports and ledgers. My conversation with Sandy Ives were more interesting. His sources crossed Bubbling from time to time, but across him was all it ever was. Ives had spent a good part of his lifetime setting down oral histories, yarns, in other words, almost Vernon. In practice, Branson Buninger would undoubtedly have seen as taking the low road. Ives had been written a cycle of articles on Derry during the years 1963-66. Most of the old-timers he talked to then were dead by the time I started my own investigation, but they had sons, daughters, nephews, cousins, and of course, one of the great true facts of the world is this. For every old-timer who dies, there is an old-timer coming along, and a good story never dies. It is always passed down. I sat on a lot of porches and back stops, drank a lot of tea, black label beer, homemade root beer, tap water, spring water. I did a lot of listening, and the wheels of my tape player turned. Both Buninger and Ives agreed completely on one. The original party of white settlers numbered about 300. They were English. They had a charter and were formerly known as the Derry Company. The land granted them covered what is today Derry, most of Newport, and little slices of the surrounding towns. And in the year 1741, everyone in Derry Township just disappeared. They were there in June of that year, and community, which at that time numbered about 340 souls, but come October, they were gone. The little village of wooden homes stood utterly deserted. Of one of them, which once stood roughly at the place where Witcham and Jackson Streets intersect, today was burned to the ground. The Mitchin history states firmly that all the villagers were slaughtered by Indians. But there is no Bassi save the one burn house. For that idea, more likely someone's stove just got too hot and the house went up in flames. Indian massacre? Doubtful. No bones, no body, no flood, not that year. Disease? No word of it in the surrounding towns. They just disappeared. All of them, all 340 of them, without a trace. So far as I know, the only case remotely like it in American history in the disappearance of the colonists on Rauku Island, Virginia. Every school child in the country knows about that one, but who knows about the Derry disappearance? Not even the people who live here. Apparently, I quizzed several junior high students who are talking the requirement main history course, and none of them knew a thing about it. Then I checked the text, Marine then and now. There are better than 40 index entries for Derry, most of them, considering the boom years of the lumbering industry. Nothing about the disappearance of the original colonists, and yet that was Saul, I call it. That quite fits the pattern, too. There is a kind of curtain of quiet which cloaks much of what has happened here, and yet people to do talk. I guess nothing can stop people from talking, but you have to listen hard, and that is a rare skill. I flattered myself that I've developed it over the last 4 years. If I haven't, then my aptitude for the job must be poor indeed, because I've had enough practice. An old man told him about how his wife had heard voices speaking to her from the drain of her kitchen sink in the 3 weeks before their daughter died. That was in the early winter of 1957-58. The girl he spoke of was one of the early victims in the murder spear, which begun with George Debrock and did not end until the following summer. A whole slew of voices, all of them babbling together. He told me he owned a Gulf station of Kansas Street and talked in between, slow, limping in trips out to the pumps where he filled gas tanks, checked oil levels, and whips windshields. Said she spoke back once even though she was cured. Leaned right over the drain. She did, and hollered down into it. Who the hell are you? She calls. What's your name? And all these voices answered back. She said, grunts and babbles and howls and yips, screams and laughing. Don't you know? And she said they were saying what the possessed man said to Jesus. Our name is Legions. They said she wouldn't go near that sink for 2 years. For them 2 years, I'd spent 12 hours a day down here, busting my hump. They have to go home and wash all the damn dishes. He was drinking a can of Pepsi from the machine outside the office door. A man of 22. Or free in faded gray work finishy rivers of wrinkles following down from the corners of his eyes and mouth. By now you probably think I'm as crazy as a bedbug, he said, but I'll tell you something else. If you'll turn off wiggling there, I turn off my tape recorder and smiled at him, considering some of the things I've heard over the last couple of years. You have to go a fair country distance to convince me. You're crazy, I said. He smiled back, but there was no humor in it. I was doing the dishes one night, same as usual. This was in fall of 58, after things had settled down again. My wife was upstairs, sleeping. Betty was the only kid God ever saw fit to give us. And after she was killed, my wife spent a lot of her time sleeping. Anyway, I pulled the plug and the water started running out of the sink. You know the sound real soapy water makes when it goes down the drain. Kind of sucking sound. It is. It was making that noise. But I wasn't thinking about it. Only about going out and chopping some kindly in the shed. And just as that sound started to die off, I heard my daughter down there. I heard Betty somewhere down in those friggin' pipes, laughing. She was somewheres down there in the dark, laughing, only it sounded more like she was screaming. Once you listen a bit, or both, screaming and laughing down there in the pipes. That's the only time I ever heard anything like that. Maybe I just imagine it, but I don't think so. He looked at me, and I looked at him, the light falling through the dirty plate glass windows onto his face, filled him up with years, and made him look as ancient as Michelins. I remember how cold I felt at that moment. How cold. You think I'm storying you along? The old man asked me, the old man who would have been just about 45 in 1957. The old man to whom God had given a single daughter, Betty Ripson by name. Betty had been found on Outer Jackson Street just after Christmas of that year, frozen, her remains ripped wide open. No, I said, I don't think you're just storying me all along, Mr. Ripson, and you're telling the truth, too, he said with a kind of wonder. I can see it on your face. I think he meant to tell me something more then. But the bell behind us dinged sharply as a car rolled over the house on the tarmac and pulled up to the pumps. When the bell rang, both of us jumped, and I uttered a thin little cry. Ripson got to his feet and limped out to the car, whipping his hand on the ball of waste. When he came back, and he looked at me as though I were rather unsavory stranger who had just happened to wander in off the street. I made my goodbyes and left. Bertrand and Ives agreed on something else. Things really are not right here in Derry. Things in Derry have never been right. I saw Albert Carson for the last time, a cent month before he died. His throat had gotten much worse. All he could manage was a hissing little whisper. Still thinking about writing a history of Derry, Hanlon? Still toying with the idea? I said, but I had, of course, never planned to write a history to the township. Not exactly, but I think he knew it. It'd take you 20 years, he whispered, and no one would read it. No one would want to read it. Let it go, Hanlon. He paused a moment and then added, Bolgernon committed suicide. You know, of course, I had known that, but only because people always talk and I had learned to listen. The artificial in the news had called it in a fallen accident, and it was true that Bryson Bunninger had taken a fall. What the news neglected to mention was that he fell from a stud in his closet, and he had a noose around his neck at the time. You know about the cycle? I looked at him, startled. Oh, yes, Carson whispered. I know every 26 or 27 years. Bunninger knew to a lot of the old-timers do, although that is one thing they won't talk about, even if you load them up with booze. Let it go, Hanlon. He reached out with one bird-claw hand. He closed it around my wrist, and I could feel the hot cancer that was loose and raving through his body, eating anything and everything left was still good to eat. Not that there could have been much by that time. Albert Carson's cupboards were almost bare. Michael, this is nothing you want to mess into. There are things here in Derry that bite. Let it go. Let it go. I can't. Then beware, he said. Suddenly, the huge and frightened eyes of a child were looking out of his dying old man's face. Beware, Derry, my hometown, named after the country of the same name in Ireland. Derry. I was born here, in Derry Home Hospital, attend Derry Elementary School, went to junior high in 9th Street Middle School, to high school at Derry High. I went to University of Maine, ain't in Derry, but it's just down the road, the old times say, and then I came right back here to the Derry Public Library. I am a small town man, living a small town life, one among millions. But in 1879, a crew of lumberjacks found the remains of other crew that had spent the winter snowed it at a camp on the upper Camberson at the tip of what the kids still called the Barians. There were 9 of them, and all 9 hacked to pieces. Heads had rolled, not to mention arms, a foot or two, and a man's penis had been nailed to one wall of the cadnam. But in 1951, John Markson killed his entire family with a poison and then sitting in the middle of the circle he had made their corpses, he gobbled inside an entire white nightshade mushroom. His death agonies must have been intense. The town gospelin who had found him wrote in his report at first he believed the corpse was grinning at him. He wrote of Markinson's awful white smile. The white smile has an entire mouthful of the killer mushroom. Markson had gone on eating even as the cramps at the execution muscles must have been racking his dying body. But on Easter Sunday, 1906, the owners of the Kitchen Iron Works, which stood there where the brand spanking new Derry Mall now stands, held on Easter egg hunt for all the good children of Derry. The hunt took place in the huge ironworks building. Dangerous arenas were closed off, and employees volunteered their time to stand guard and make sure no adventurous boys or girl decided to duck under the barriers and explore. 500 chocolate Easter eggs wrapped in gay ribbons were hidden about the rest of the works. According to Berkshire, there was at least one child present for each of those eggs, then ran, giggling and whomping and yelling, although the sudden silent ironworks, finding the eggs, uttered the giant tipper bites. Inside the desk drawers of the 4-man balanced between the great rusty teeth of gear wheels inside the molds. On the 3rd floor, in the old photographs, these molds look like cupcakes, tins from some giant's kitchen. The 3 generations of kitcheners were there to watch the gay roids and to award prizes at the end of the hunt, which was to come at 4 o'clock, whenever all of the eggs had been found or not. The end actually came 45 minutes earlier at 3:15. That end actually came 45 minutes earlier at 3:15. That was when the ironworks exploded. 72 people were pulled dead from the wreckage before the sun went down. The final toll was 102. 88 of the dead were children. On the following Wednesday, while the city still lay in stunned, silent contemplation of the tragedy, a woman found the head of 9-year-old Robert Dohe caught in the limbs of her backyard apple tree. There was chocolate and Dobe, lad's teeth, and blood in his hair. He was the last of the known dead. 8 children and 1 adult were never accounted for. It was the most tragedy in Derry's history, even worse than the fire at the Black Spot in 1930. It was never explained. All 4 of the ironworks boilers were shut down. Not just blank shut down, but the murder rate in the Derry is 6 times the murder rate of any other town of comparable size in New England. I found my tentative conclusion in this matter so difficult to believe that I turned my figurines over to one of the high school hackers who spends what time he doesn't spend in front of the comrades here in the library. He went several steps further, scratching hacker, finding overreaching by adding another dozen small cities to what he called the stat pool, and presented me with a computer generate bar graph where Derry sticks out like a sore thumb. People must have wicked, short tempers. Here, Mr. Hanlon was his only comment. I didn't reply. If I had, I might have told him that something in Derry has a wicked short temper anyway. Here in Derry, children disappear unexplained and unfound at a rate of 40 to 60 a year. Most are teenagers. They are assumed to be runaways. I suppose some of them even are. And during what Albert Carson would undoubtedly have called the time of the cycle, the rate of disappearance shoots nearly are of sights. In the year 1930, of instant, the year the Black Spot burned, There were better than 170 child disappearances in Derry, and you must remember that these are only the disappearances which were reported to the police and fuss doctorman. Nothing surprising about it. The sergeant chef of police told me when I showed him the Statican. It was depression. Most of them probably got tired of eating potato soup or flat hungry at home and went a riding the rods, looking for something better. During 1958, 127 children, ranging in age from 3 to 19, were reported missing in Derry. Was then a depression of 1958? I asked Chief Ranmacher. No, he said, but people move around. A lot handling. Kids, in particular, got itchy feet. Have a fight with the folks about coming in late after a date, and boom, they're gone. I showed Chief Ranmacher the picture of Chad Lowen, which had appeared in the Derry News in April 1958. You think this one ran away after a fight with his folks about coming in late, Chief Ranmacher? He was 3.5 when he dropped out of sight. Ranmacher fixed me with a sour glance and told him it sure had been nice talking with me. But if there was nothing else, he was busy. I left. Haunted, haunt, often visited by ghosts or spirits, as in the pipes, under the sink, to appear, of recur often, as every 25, 26, or 27 years, a feeding place for animals, as in the case of George Debrick, Adrian Mellon, Betty Whipson, the Albert girl, the Johnson boy, and feeding place for animals. Yes, that's one that haunts me. If anything else happens, anything at all, I'll make the call. I'll have to. In the meantime, I have my supposition, my broken rest, and my memories, my damned memories. And one other thing. I have this note back, don't I? The wall I wail to. And here I sit, my hand shaken so badly I can hardly write it in. Here I sit in the deserted library after closing, listening to faint sounds in the dark stacks, watching the shadows throw my dim yellow globes to make sure they don't move, don't change. Here I sit next to the telephone. I put my free hand on it, let it slide down, touch the hole in the dial that could put me in touch with all of them, my old pals. We went deep together. We went into the black together. Would we come out of the black if we went in second time? I don't think so. Please God, I don't have to call them. Please God.